Hey guys, before I start the review today, I'm going to do something a little different. While looking into the development of this game, I came across some links pointing to official websites in both Europe and America that were made to promote Wario Land 4 around the time of its release. The American website, welcometogreedville.com, amazing name by the way, is now a Japanese air conditioner website, or whatever this shit is, but the European website is still up and running. It's pretty basic though, it just has blurbs of text describing aspects of the game like different transformations and the general plot. You can also download some pretty underwhelming gameplay clip shows showing off each world, and the footage you're seeing now is downloaded from the higher resolution version of this clip. Now that's all fine and good, but I wouldn't be talking about this if it was just some poorly compressed gameplay videos and text blurbs. I decided to use the Wayback Machine to try and find an archived version of the original American website, and boy did I. The website opens with what is clearly not Charles Martinet doing Wario's voice.
Welcome to my town! Elegant! Lovely! Ain't it? Come on! Time's a wasted! Enter one of my fantastic attractions!
Inviting us into Greedville, a whole little town made by Wario. In the movie theater, you can look at some screenshots of the game, as well as watch 2 movies about the game that I couldn't get working because I need some kind of plugin that I don't have. Then there's Greed School, where you can find a link to a PDF of a comic called Mario vs. Wario, which is actually a pretty cute little comic. I'll leave a link to it in the description for those interested in it. There's also a Greed Test, which is a 20-question multiple-choice test where all the answers imply as much greed and selfishness as possible, as well as a few questions based on trivia about Wario Land 4 itself. Getting all the questions right will net you 20 greed bucks that can be spent at the Wario Mart on things like hints for Wario Land 4 and some screensavers. You can also get greed bucks by playing these mini-games in the arcade. They're all pretty basic and fairly easy, but unfortunately, for some reason, the game didn't save the Wario bucks I earned into my wallet correctly, so I wasn't able to get any of the stuff at the store, which I was pretty bummed out about. I even tried digging into the source code and changing values around, but it just didn't work. Finally, there's the post office, which is literally nothing but a link to a page to sign up for Nintendo Power that no longer works. This whole website is a riot and pretty fun to mess around with, especially with the wonderfully cheesy voice acting, so I'll leave a link to the archive I used to play this in the description. Go check it out after this video. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's begin with the actual review. Wario Land 4 starts with Wario rushing out in his very stylish car and nearly running over a cat. A newspaper flies out from behind the car detailing a pyramid that was recently discovered to contain a bunch of treasure, so being the greedy guy we know him to be, Wario sets off to claim it. It's simple and effective, setting up the premise with no dialogue at all, and is presented in a very stylistic way. Once you start the game, Wario heads straight into the pyramid and runs into a black cat. I think it's supposed to be the same one from before, but I could be wrong. Anyway, he dives right in and you're plopped straight into the tutorial level, which does a great job of explaining all of Wario's moves in a quick and concise level. The story is perfect for a Wario game. It's simplistic, charming, and puts you in the game pretty quickly, so it gets no complaints from me. The presentation is absolutely fantastic. This is by far one of the best looking GBA games I've ever played, up there with the likes of Metroid Fusion. The colors are vibrant and beautiful, and they rarely ever look muted or ugly. The sprites are all incredibly detailed and well animated, it makes use of some impressive visual effects for GBA standards, and the level theming is among the best in the series. Similarly to Wario Land 3, every level has its own theme, and they're all very creative. Some notable examples include Pinball Zone, which has you on the inside of a giant pinball machine throwing pinballs into holes to open doors and reveal some secret items, Domino Row, in which you race a falling stack of dominoes to the end of each room to score a prize at the end if you win, and The Big Board, which is just one giant board game where you stop these rolling counters and move your cursor forwards through the board to alter things in the level design. Not every level is a winner, some use a pretty generic template like this fire level here, but even this one switches it up by freezing over and turning the rising lava spires into icy platforms at the end of the level. Point is, this is easily one of the most visually creative and gorgeous games I've ever played, and it's on the GBA. Another aspect it does surprisingly well for a GBA game is the music. Most of the soundtrack is pretty good. It goes for a very distinct style that's a little bit jazzy, but also really energetic and weird. There are a couple songs that are a little too weird for my taste, like the theme for Doodle Woods, which made me stop dead in my tracks when it started. This sounds like something straight out of Sesame Street and is played completely straight. At the very least, it fits with the level theme, which revolves around a Liquidu-like enemy following you around, scribbling enemies into existence, and has platforms made out of coloring materials. Another song I'm not particularly fond of is a vocal track that's completely in Japanese. That's not a bad thing, but for the American version of the game, they could have recorded an English version of the song, or at the very least just removed the vocal track entirely. Or maybe replace the notes that were sung with a regular instrument. Like I said, it's not a bad thing that the song is in Japanese, but it is a little distracting. Oddly enough, both of these songs played during the credits instead of just having a dedicated credits theme. Can I just say that I hate when games do this? Is it really that hard to just compose one new song for your 2D platformer? I mean, it's not like it's an RPG with hundreds of different orchestral tracks or something like that, so it just feels a little lazy when games just reuse music for the credits. Aside from the one Japanese vocal track and that weird baby song, the rest of the vocal clips are pretty good. They're mostly just Wario's grunts, but considering their voice clips on the GBA, they sound pretty great. Charles Martinet gives a good performance as always, and makes the game just that little bit more enjoyable. Despite a few minor annoyances, the sound design is overall great, especially considering how notorious the GBA is for having awful instrumentation and terrible sounding samples. The presentation in Wario Land 4 is fantastic, and easily one of the best on the system. Wario Land 4 is very much an evolution of the Wario Land formula in almost every way, and spoilers, but there's very little I really have to complain about here. Let's start with the basic mechanics. Everything Wario could do in the previous games is all here and accounted for, along with a new move. By holding the R button and running for a short time, you can initiate a more powerful dash attack that runs straight through breakable blocks and can break stronger blocks denoted with a different color. This move is put to good use through some pretty good physics and timing-based platforming challenges, since it carries so much momentum with it, as well as increasing your speed more and more as you wind it up. It's also a great move for getting around the levels faster and comes in very handy towards the end of each level. Alongside the returning moveset are the transformations from Wario Land 3, and a handful of them have been cut, which I think was actually for the better. Unfortunately, the bubbles are still here, but they don't show up too often and aren't the most annoying thing in the world this time around, so they get a pass. The transformations are put to their best use in this game, with really cleverly designed puzzles based around each of their abilities. Wario Land 3 showed a good initiative for well-designed puzzles based around transformations, and it seems like they've really learned from what that game did right and what it did wrong, because the puzzles in Wario Land 4 are the best in the series. While the transformation-based puzzles are well done, they kind of take a backseat to the more environmental puzzles based around getting the most out of Wario's moveset and the level's designs. There is a good amount of transformation-based puzzles, but there definitely are a lot more environment-based puzzles, especially when compared to Wario Land 2 or 3. Personally, I find this to be an improvement, since the transformations were never really the best puzzles anyway. Before I get too much into the level design and puzzles, however, let's talk about the game's structure. Once you finish the tutorial level, you're plopped into a pathetically easy boss fight, but for the first boss, it's fine. Once you beat him, the rest of the game opens up. There are 4 worlds, each with 4 levels in them, and in each of those 4 levels there are 4 pieces of a jewel hidden somewhere in the level, as well as a CD that lets you listen to that level's theme in the sound test. While the CD is optional, you need all of the jewel pieces from every level in a world to unlock that world's boss. Once you beat every boss, the final level unlocks, followed by the final boss. Within each level, the jewel pieces are all placed pretty well, with none of them being too hard to find, but a lot of the time they'll just be sitting there with almost nothing stopping you from just grabbing it, though a good chunk of them are hidden or locked behind a puzzle, and they make for a pretty good reward. The CDs are always in a hard-to-reach area, so they're a good reward for player skill and intuition. Wario Land 4 also added a health bar, and this is where things get a little rocky. When you die in a level, you have to restart the entire level all over again. Normally, this is a fair punishment for a 2D platformer, but for Wario Land 4, it's a little different. Because of how many things there are to do in each level, and because of all the puzzles, each level averages around 15 to 20 minutes, and there are no checkpoints at all. I don't know why they couldn't have set a checkpoint every time you collected one of the jewel pieces, or at least every 2 pieces since the levels last so long. However, it's not that bad since your health bar is fairly long, and similarly to Wario Land 1, once you kill enemies, they despawn for good unless you die and re-enter the level. For the first couple of worlds that I played, I went out of my way to collect all the little gems and diamonds I found along the way, but since it took more time and therefore put me at greater risk of losing my health and having to restart the whole level over again, I stopped worrying about them completely halfway through the game. There are also these little purple pipes hidden throughout each level that take you to a mini puzzle room that rewards you with a diamond for solving it. Eventually I just ignored them altogether because I just didn't care enough about getting points and didn't want to waste my time. The levels go on for long enough as it is, and tacking on extra minutes to do these pointless puzzles is just a waste of time. Here's the thing, the CDs at least give you a song to listen to in the sound test, but the gems are only used to add to your high score for each level, so there's not really any incentive to grab them. Well, that's not entirely true. There's also a shop in this game. Before entering a boss fight, you can go into this little shop and buy some items to help during the boss fight, but instead of using gems, you need medals to buy them. How do you get medals then? You have to play these really boring, frustrating minigames. In order to play these minigames, you need to spend gems to get into them, so that does give you a little bit of incentive to collect gems, but honestly, you can get through most of the bosses just fine without the items, with the exception of one of them, but I like to talk about the bosses last, so I'll touch on that much later. Earlier I mentioned that the 4 different worlds are all open at once after you beat the intro boss. This is another big problem that I have with Wario Land 4. The difficulty balancing is all over the place. Within each world, the 4 levels you play in order balance out nicely in terms of difficulty, but some worlds are much easier than others. For example, I played the green world last, and it was easily the easiest world in the game. I also got stuck around the second world that I played because of a difficulty spike. Point is, they could have easily fixed this by putting the worlds in a fixed order. Virtual Boy Wario Land did this by making each level in order such that the entire game sees Wario making his way upwards through a cave. Similarly, Wario Land 4 could have made it so that you travel downwards through 4 different layers, deeper and deeper into the pyramid until you reach the core being the final area. Unfortunately, this isn't the case, and if I'm honest, I can't think of any good reason for them to make every world open from the start. This gives the game the same problem that plagued the Mega Man series all the way up until 7, where they can't accurately balance the difficulty curve because you can play the levels in any order. I wouldn't have a problem with this if there was a good reason for them to be played in any order. Mega Man gets away with this because it encourages experimentation to find the optimal route for boss weaknesses, but with this game there's no connection between mechanics or bosses or anything like that within the different worlds, so I really don't know why they chose to structure the game like this. There's one last mechanic I haven't mentioned so far, and that's that once you get back to the end of a level, you hit this blue frog guy and a countdown begins. This wacky music kicks in and the screen starts going wild with all these crazy effects, and you have to race all the way back to the beginning of the level to hop back into the portal before the timer ends. Out of curiosity, I decided to run out the timer just to see what happens, and fortunately, it only drains your coins until you get back into the portal. On top of that, the time limits are very generous. I like this mechanic since it adds some tension to the end of each level, and once you make it out, you can breathe a big sigh of relief, and it's pretty satisfying. Sometimes the levels will also have some of the jewel pieces on paths that you can only go to while the timer is going, denoted by blocks that will switch on or off after the frog is activated. This means that even if you think you have enough of the level design memorized to speed through it backwards, you still might have to stay on your toes and quickly solve puzzles. The stakes for running out of time are kind of low, but I'd rather the punishment not be that bad than the punishment be do the entire level over again when you only had about 5 seconds left before finishing it. With all that out of the way, let's finally talk about the level design. Wario Land 4 has some of the best level design in the entire series. There are so many standout levels with creative and unique themes, interesting mechanics that I've never seen in any other 2D platformer, and genuinely smart and fun puzzles that don't force me to repeat a bunch of level design over and over again. Enemies are put to great use, with many of them only being able to be defeated with certain moves, but a handful of them are a bit of a pain in the ass. This one enemy that runs around with an axe is really annoying since I could never seem to find a way to defeat him without taking a bunch of damage, and it made any time I encountered one instantly stressful. Aside from those guys, the enemies are well done and serve a good purpose. Some are even used in puzzles with ones similar to puzzles we saw back in Wario Land 3. Just like the puzzles from that game where you had to ground pound to make an enemy go up these little bars, Wario Land 4 has a puzzle where you have to do the same thing but make sure he doesn't walk back down a layer by walking off the sides here. There's even a rolling puzzle that's like a further evolution of the same puzzle from Sea Turtle Rocks in the last game. Even though the puzzles using transformations aren't as common as they were in the last game, they're even better executed here and use the abilities in concise ways that make for some fun puzzles. Alongside those, there are plenty of environment and level design based puzzles that take full advantage of Wario's moveset. Levels where you have to ground pound from certain areas to break stronger blocks, puzzles where you have to time and space dash attacks to get to certain areas, and plenty of puzzles that take advantage of Wario's throwing mechanics. For example, going back to Pinball Zone, along with the incredibly creative concept, the puzzles have you moving around pinballs with Wario's different moves and then taking them and throwing them into these little pinball holes. It starts off pretty simple and gets more complex as the level goes on, adding more things to avoid and more ways to interact with the pinballs. There's also Domino Row, which, as I mentioned earlier, sees you racing to the end of each room against a stack of falling dominoes, and beating them nets you with a small reward. Throughout the level, each room is longer and has more obstacles to get around than the last, and really puts your platforming skill to the test. Another great level is the Big Board, which is like a normal level, but has these rolling counters in it. When you walk up to them, a board shows up at the bottom, and you can jump into the rolling counters to get a number, and move across the board that many spaces. You'll need to time your jumps so you can land on specific spots to spawn enemies that you can use to get transformations, or land on spots to switch certain blocks on and off. It's one big board game inside of the level, and it's incredibly creative and fun. In fact, most of the levels in this game are just that, really tightly designed, unique, and just really fun. Wario Land 4 is some of the best level design for a puzzle platformer I've ever seen. There's a good mix of platforming challenges and interesting puzzles that never get too obtuse, and they often come together to make really fun and challenging levels. The only other thing I really have to talk about are the bosses. For the most part, they're okay. Unfortunately, there are two major problems that take what would be just okay to pretty fun bosses and make them okay to horrible bosses. The Green World's boss, Cractus, is pretty solid. You have to climb up the ladders to ground pound on top of his head while avoiding his saliva that turns you into Zombie Wario. Pretty fun and challenging. The Red World's boss, Cuckoo Condor, is also pretty solid. You have to lure his Cranktown and then run out and bash it, all while avoiding buzzsaws and electric shocks. Once you hit him enough times, the outer shell breaks and he flies around laying eggs that you have to pick up and throw back into his head. The problem here is that throwing things upwards with a charged throw is a bit finicky, and when you're in a high stress situation like this, one minor mistake can cost you a bunch of time. If you're charging up an upwards throw, you have to start holding up and then press and hold B. Once it's charged, you have to let go of B and make sure not to let go of up until the animation of Wario throwing the item is done, or you'll just throw it sideways by accident. It's a small thing, but it's really obnoxious when you're in a tense boss fight and aren't allowed to make mistakes like this, especially if the time limit is too strict. Oh yeah, and the bosses all have time limits. In a normal level, if you pause the game, you have the option to exit the level and start over at any time. However, in the bosses, where this would actually be useful, the pause screen is just a black screen with the word pause in red letters. Why the hell is there no option to restart the boss fights? If you're not doing well on a boss and you know you're not going to beat it before the time limit, you have to either just get hit until you die or just wait out the time limit. This can get really tedious if you're struggling with a boss and just want to start over. Anyway, the Blue World boss, Cat Rat, is okay but kind of a mess. You have to dodge a drill slowly moving back and forth underwater, balance in between floating platforms, avoid spike balls, and jump on top of these waterfalls to bash into the boss's head. There's already a ton of stuff going on at the start of the fight, but as you get further in, the boss moves faster and waves start moving up and down, and it gets really overwhelming really fast. That's not even the worst boss though. That honor goes to the Yellow World's boss, Air Rodent. You have to wait for these spike enemies to float down so you can jump on top of them and pick them up. Then you have to throw them up into the boss's ass, which as I said earlier can be annoying when you're in a high pressure situation and have a small margin for error. Then you have to charge into the bear's feet to turn him around, but if you miss by a tiny bit, he starts bouncing away and you won't be able to hit him again until you throw another spiky enemy into him. Once you hit his foot, he turns upside down and the little rat guy inside comes out and you can hit him, but you have to hit him in this really precise area where if you're off by a tiny bit, he'll start floating away and you'll have to go through the whole cycle again just to get another chance to hit him. Here's the kicker though, because of the ridiculously strict time limit, even if you get a perfect fight, you can't just hit him once per cycle and still beat the boss. Each cycle takes too long and he has way too much health. In fact, every boss in this game has way too much health. You not only have to space these really strict jump attacks into the rat, but then you have to go back and space out another attack. You need to get multiple double hits or you will just not have enough time to beat the boss. Of course, the solution to this would be to get an item from the shop before fighting the boss, but if I'm honest, I kinda forgot they even existed. I didn't really know what the shop even did because I never got enough medals to use any of them. Despite this, I still think the boss should be well designed enough for anyone to be able to beat it without having to grind some minigame for an item that makes it possible. The other big issue making this fight absolute hell is that when you try to do a bash attack right after turning around, if you press B before the animation of Wario turning around finishes, the attack won't go through and you'll just end up jumping and not attacking. This cheated me out of a hit so many times that I ended up getting stuck on this boss for over an hour. I know that this is at least partially my fault for ignoring the item system, but like I said, I shouldn't need an item to help me beat a boss. The bosses also all have these 3 treasure chests in the background, and depending on how quickly you beat them, you'll get more or less chests. To get all 3 chests for any given boss fight, you just need to beat it with 1 minute or more left on the timer. I got this pretty easily with every boss except for Aerodent, which I only got 2 on. There was no way I was spending another 40 minutes trying to beat the boss within another arbitrary time limit, so I didn't bother going back for the 3rd chest. These chests actually determine your ending, which I'll get into a little bit later. Once you defeat all 4 bosses, the center of the pyramid opens up and you have one final level that tests your abilities with every transformation, every move in Wario's moveset, and your puzzle solving skills all under a time limit for the entire level. It's a fantastically designed level and perfectly capstones the game. After that is the final boss, the Golden Diva. This is a pretty solid final boss. Not as good as Wario Land 3's, but it definitely feels a lot more final, if that makes sense. Just like the level before it capstones the game with a bunch of mechanics used in previous levels, the final boss capstones the game with a bunch of mechanics used in the previous boss fights. You have to use your dash to shoot a ball into her face, pick up a smaller ball and throw it into her face, throw eggs into her head, and throw hammers up onto your own head to transform into Spring Wario and spring into her face. There's quite a lot going on in this fight, and it gets pretty hectic, but never gets too overwhelming. You're much more likely to run out of health than time, so it's all about testing your skill, which is exactly what a final boss should do. Once you take her down, the pyramid begins to crash and you grab your sack of loot and get out of there, with the black cat from before following suit. The amount of treasures you got from the final boss determine your ending, but regardless of the ending you get, a princess kisses you and flies away with some angels. At the end of the credits, the intro scene plays out again, but as Wario speeds off in his car, the newspaper flies down and reads, $10 all-you-can-eat steak buffet. I won't lie, I clapped at that. This really is the perfect ending for a Wario game, and I absolutely love it. Wario Land 4 is a really good game. It has excellent level design that makes great use of both the transformations and Wario's moveset, as well as having some really unique and creative level gimmicks. The mechanics are fun and put to great use despite a little bit of jank. While the bosses are kinda weak and the game's structure ruins the difficulty curve, these aren't issues that kill the game like, say, the repetition in Wario Land 3. I wouldn't really say that I like it more than VB Wario Land for two reasons. One, Wario Land 4's levels are kinda bloated and can drag on a bit too long at times. While they are really well designed, even a creative and fun level can overstay its welcome. And two, I personally just prefer Wario Land as an action platformer rather than a puzzle platformer. They're both really good games, and I might even say that Wario Land 4 is better, but VB Wario Land has a very slight edge over it due to my personal preference. Regardless, I can easily recommend this game. If you haven't played it, pick it up on the Wii U eShop or a physical cart. It's definitely worth playing, even if the game does have a few rough spots. With that said, I'll see you in my next video, where I'll be talking about the latest game in the Wario Land series as of now, Wario Land Shake It for the Wii. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.